Everything that's alive has a method of staying alive. A lion has claws to hunt with. A deer has speed to avoid the hunter. We have the capacity to think. And our capacity to think is literally our only means of survival, success, and happiness, and no shortcuts, no free lunches. In my view, we're very fortunate that the great genius of history, Aristotle, taught us how to think. He did that back in 300 BC. And he said we ought to begin with premises based on the facts. We ought to use induction and deduction to derive conclusions. We ought to integrate those conclusions without contradiction. Fundamental rule of logic is avoid contradiction. And then that conclusion could become a premise for a higher level of thinking. Despite knowing how to think properly for a long period of time, a lot of times we don't think that way, right? That's our means of survival, success, and happiness. A lot of times we think in a muddled fashion, and if you violate your means of success and happiness, you get a bad outcome, right? It's also interesting how we try to improve our thinking process. We tend to look at higher level thinking. I taught in a graduate MBA program, so I respect higher level thinking. However, the real driver in thinking is premises. Our conclusions almost always naturally follow from our premises. If you're having an argument with somebody about something that matters, the odds are very high you're not arguing about what you think you're arguing about at the top of your mind. You're probably arguing about premises that neither one of you hold consciously. If you build a 20-story building on quicksand, the building's going to fall over. Premises drive conclusions. If you want to improve your thinking, the most powerful thing you can do is objectively look at your premises as an adult. Look at your most fundamental beliefs. Where did you get your most fundamental beliefs? From your moms, dads, Sunday school teachers, kindergarten teachers when you were very young. Where did they get their fundamental beliefs? From mom, dad, Sunday school teachers, kindergarten teachers when they were very young. Where did they get their beliefs? From moms, dads, Sunday school teachers, kindergarten teachers when they were very young. So if you think about that set of beliefs, they're pretty primitive. And secondly, they're probably a hodgepodge. You probably have some beliefs that make a lot of sense and some that may not make so much sense. You probably, even if you love your parents, you can probably see things in your parents that keep them from being as happy as they could be. You may have a different content, but the odds is very high you have the same context. If you want to improve your capacity to think and your capacity to be happy, have the courage to objectively examine your beliefs as an adult. Reject all beliefs which are inconsistent with reality. They can't believe, and reject all contradictions. Contradictions can't exist in reality. When I talk about thinking with the employees of BB&T, I try to focus on the fact that it wasn't about being a genius. I don't know whether you can or how much you can impact your IQ. Plus, I know a lot of people with high IQs that are pretty crazy. But you can choose to be a disciplined thinker. You can choose to commit yourself to being a lifelong learner. And if you think about a person that's a lifelong learner, they have to have a very active mind. They have to be engaged. And if you look at people that are successful lifelong learners, they ultimately become masters of their field of endeavor. They become really good at what they do. And for your age group, that's very important because you're now competing with 7 billion people on this planet that are a lot closer to us through technology, are a lot better educated and willing to work a lot harder than you and a lot less. So you really need to be good at what you do. You need to achieve mastery. And if you look at people that become masters, that have this commitment to lifelong learning, they read more, they take advantage of educational seminars, but they're particularly effective at learning from life experiences. We are primarily life experience learners. And if you look at people that are particularly effective at learning their life experiences, they do two simple but profound things well. Probably everybody in here can associate with learning from your mistakes. You probably had mistakes that changed your life. However, a lot of times we don't learn from our mistakes, do we? We actually embed them into our personality. You ever do something and say, wow, I did that before and I wish I hadn't done it again, and then you do it again? We often embed our mistakes into our personality. Why do we not learn from our mistakes? Because in order to learn from a mistake, we not only have to admit we made a mistake, but we have to admit the deepest psychological cause of that mistake. And a lot of time we're guilty of that ultimate psychological sin, the act of evasion. If you evade, you cannot learn from your mistakes. Superior experiential learners evade less and therefore learn far more rapidly. The second thing that superior experiential learners know is that life is a constant education if you let it be one. It's a constant education. When I was running BB&T, we had 33 community banks. I'd go visit those banks. I had lunches with our local advisory board members who are business and community leaders. I never had a boring lunch. They were always asking questions. They were always engaged. You could see why they had been successful. Unfortunately, a lot of people live their lives out of focus. They're not paying attention to what's going on. You know, there's this debate about free will. I believe that we have free will, and that the evidence of free will is something that everybody here can observe from a self perspective. The evidence of free will is a set of decisions that you've been making since you were very young, that you literally make every few seconds, and that only you can choose to make. And that set of decisions is a choice to focus your mind or not, to be here or not. And only you can make that decision. And nobody can stay in focus all the time, but you do choose when you are here. In a presentation like this, you should be here. On Friday night, you get to go out of focus, maybe if you want to, but you choose whether you're here or not. One of the interesting things that happens, one way we evade is I'll say something you don't want to hear, and you'll go out of focus. You choose whether you're here or not. Superior experiential learners do two simple things. They evade less and they stay in focus more, which is a huge competitive advantage in life. Third value is independent thinking. Independent thinking means thinking for yourself from the facts of reality. We learn a lot from each other. Teamwork is very important, but we think alone. Our minds are not physically connected. Independent thinking makes two things both possible and necessary: responsibility and creativity. The most important meta-psychological decision you can make is choose to be responsible for yourself. If you view yourself as a victim in any aspect of your life, you give your power away. Because if you're a victim, somebody else has to change to make you happy, and you can't change anybody else. It is true that bad things happen to good people. And it's also true good things happen to bad people. Mother Nature is just Mother Nature. Mother Nature's just Mother Nature. However, you are responsible for doing the best you can with what happens to you. Another interesting observation, something everybody in here knows, but most people are in great resistance to. At least at the level of consciousness, we are all alone. At least at the level of consciousness, we're all alone. Sorry, that's just the way it is. Therefore, only you can be responsible for you. It is not possible for anybody else to be responsible for you. The flip of that's also true. You can't be responsible for anybody else. Classic parental error, classic managerial error. You cannot be responsible for your children. If you try to be responsible for your children, you'll set them up to fail. You are responsible to teach your children to be responsible for themselves. As a manager, you cannot be responsible for your employees, and you see this in a lot of young managers. They try to be responsible for their employees. You cannot be responsible for your employees. If you try to do that, you'll set them and you up to fail. You are responsible to do your absolute best to teach your employees to be responsible for themselves, and if they refuse to learn, get another employee. Creativity. All human progress, by definition, is based on creativity. Unless somebody does something better, which will be different, there can be no progress. Creativity is only possible to an independent thinker, somebody that thinks like the crowd, cannot be innovative, cannot be creative, cannot contribute to human progress. By the way, that's why entrepreneurs are so important. Entrepreneurs, in a certain sense, are responsible for all human progress. They take the ideas of engineers and scientists and turn them into reality. It's why capitalism works and socialism and communism always fails, because socialist and communist systems destroy innovation and destroy creativity, and innovation and creativity are essential for human well-being. You know, it's interesting to look at the issue of creativity. If you talk to many people, they don't view themselves as creative, and they view creativity as some kind of mystical, magical experience. Not so. Creativity is an intellectual activity. It's true that most creativity takes place in the subconscious, but most of your thinking takes place in the subconscious. It's a fairly good analogy. You can think of yourself as a computer programmer. Since you were very young, you've been writing computer programs that you've been stuffing in your brain, and you run on most of those programs. You wrote them, you can change them, but they're your programs. Most of your thinking takes place in your subconscious. Most creativity takes place in your subconscious, but it's you. It's an intellectual activity. If you look at people that are highly creative, it's interesting what defines them. They believe they're capable of being creative, and they believe it is important to be creative. Creativity is the source of all human progress. Productivity. Productivity exists on two planes. In a free market, profit is a good thing. Profit is simply the difference